back to the part 2 of the Georgia Guidestones, based on a book called Common Sense Renewed by Robert Christian. Last week there were parts, it was part 1 that covered the first 2 chapters, I believe, along with the preface. And so here's chapter 3 of the Guidestones, how somebody makes somebody want to kill themselves for the good of humankind. Sorry. I won't make any noise. Well, I'll make some noises to show you my absolute repugnance with this. All right. The cultural evolution. The human species now numbers nearly 5 billion individuals. All right, remember, this is 1986. Stripped of our acquired knowledge, we would be helpless, naked, ape-like creatures, totally ignorant, and capable of survival in all but most favorable circumstances. Now, we have intellect too, okay? All right, each of us enters this world in a completely dependent condition. Fortunately, all of the warm-blooded animals we have, of all them, we have the longest childhood. This permits us an interval in which our minds become programmed with a share of the information inherited by our family and society from hundreds of past generations of our species. The knowledge of humanity has been painfully accumulated over thousands of years. There have been infrequent additions and changes and occasional losses, but the central enduring core of survival wisdom has been sufficient to enable our ancestral lines to endure to the present. Our minds have an enormous capacity for receiving and storing information. Even with the increasing pace of new discoveries in the past 300 years, no human brain has ever become totally saturated with knowledge. The collective capacity of our racial intelligence is far beyond our present level of accomplishment. We share many anatomical and chemical features with other creatures, not only in the structure of our bodies, but also in the basic design of our central nervous system. Our most significant anatomical feature is the expansion and elaboration of our brain. Here is centered our capacity for storing and manipulating information. Here also are the neural circuits which mediate our ethical qualities, our consciousness, our ambitions, and our awareness of the high goals which are ours to achieve. These features, together with our biological adaptability and our prehensile hands, have raised our species to a new level in the evolution of life and have given us the capacity to establish dominion over the earth and all other living things. I think the Lord did that, but the science of genetics has provided us with rudimentary understanding of the manner in which a human body and brain develop from a single living cell, the fertilized ovum. That tiny miracle combines contributions from 2 parents in approximately equal proportions. Its central nucleus contains a genetic blueprint which spells out the general characteristics of our species, together with the minor variations which determine our racial and individual features. The 46 chromosomes which identify the cell from which a complete human being will develop contain 3 billion pairs of cross-linked chemical bases. These bases are of only 4 kinds, yet they comprise an alphabet which spells out the patterns of life for each of the millions of species and all their individual variations which are to be found on Earth today. Provided with a suitable environment within our mother's womb, the fertilized ovum from which each of us springs becomes a fantastic chemical factory as it begins to divide and multiply, fabricating trillions of descendant cells, each of which contains a duplicate of the genetic documentation which identifies a specific individual. Each cell also contains modifiers which are precisely triggered to establish detailed changes in form and function as the embryo undergoes growth and development. The immensely complex and coordinated sequence of cell divisions results in the formation of a perfect machine, a human body, a living miracle. Each cell takes its proper place and begins its specific functions within the composite whole. Collectively, the trillions of cells which compose each of us are orchestrated by intrinsic checks and balances to establish the ongoing symphony of chemical interactions which constitutes our human lives. Each life may continue for 10 years, gradually accumulating the flaws of wear and senility, which lead relentlessly to somatic death, the ultimate fate of all living things. Only the germ cells endure to carry on the phenomenon of life in a potentially endless chain of survival and further elaboration, extending onward in earthly time to limits beyond our ken. We human beings and our genetic blueprint bear close resemblances to other living things. Structurally, we are very much like the larger apes. Some of our proteins and cellular details are almost indistinguishable from those of other warm-blooded animals. Certain enzyme systems within us can be traced across the spectrum of living things in patterns which suggest interrelationships and sequential modifications that have occurred over long periods of evolutionary time. You follow me so far here, sports fans? Viewed objectively, our physical structure is not impressively different from some other living forms. We are not the strongest, nor the fleetest, nor the largest of the animal kingdom that we have come to dominate. Our greatest acquired feature is invisible and intangible. It is our total cultural heritage, the composite of knowledge which is maintained and transferred in our libraries and in the information stores of our arts and sciences, our trades, traditions, and all the complex living patterns of human society. The capacity for assimilating that heritage and enriching it mysteriously is contained in the trillion or more cells which constitute the living brain in each of us. Collectively, these features determine our national and individual awareness and our character. Instinctive patterns of behavior that are prominent in other creatures are less dominant in our own species. Without acquired knowledge, we cannot build a nest or sing a song or migrate with the seasons as do the birds. We do experience the drive for survival, which millions of years of evolutionary competition has instilled in us. We have strong intrinsic impulses which motivate our reproductive behavior, our acquisitiveness, and our social and antisocial tendencies. But in our daily lives, these are restrained and guided by the exigencies of our communal existence. Only at birth do inborn patterns completely dominate our behavior. As newborn infants, we know without instruction how to nurse, to cry when in distress, and to recoil from a painful stimulus. Beyond that, we are at the mercy of the elements unless protected and cared for by our family and friends. Very soon after birth, we begin a lifelong process of acquiring the knowledge and life patterns of our human environment, assisted by many social agencies, the most important of which is our family unit. Here we are sheltered and nurtured while our minds are most receptive and plastic. Here are molded and crystallized the basic attitudes and fixed response patterns that will shape our character. The process of knowledge transferal, or mental programming, is ruled more than we realize by the powers of habit. Patterns of living which have proved successful are passed down through the ages surprisingly unchanged. Transmittal of these patterns from one generation to the next is accomplished more or less unconsciously through a multitude of interhuman relationships and agencies, including language, custom, manners, tradition, literary legacies, legal systems, and many others. Religious philosophies and organizations have long been important in shaping the behavioral attitudes of human beings. They will continue that role in future ages as religious teachers adapt their doctrines to the ever-changing human condition. I won't. We are immersed in the myriads of social and cultural elements which surround us. I thought the word myriad is plural without needing an S. Okay. They become a part of us as we take our place in the larger world of human affairs. They shape our attitudes and all that we see and feel and do. The particular cultural heritage into which we are thrust becomes almost as indelibly a part of our nature as our genetically determined physical features. Our cultural birthright is what makes one person an American, another a Russian, and still another a primitive tribesman in New Guinea. They'll be glad to hear that. Unquestioning acceptance of prevailing values can be a good thing. Guidelines that have preserved our lineage have proved themselves by surmounting past hazards. They should not be discarded casually. As each newborn baby enters its particular niche in human society, it begins to accumulate the patterns of understanding and behavior that prevail in its family and nation. With further growth and learning, each child takes its place in the human story, a never-ending tapestry that began in the remote past, far beyond the dawn of history. Each life becomes a thread in the tapestry, interwoven with the light threads of others to outline a minute segment of a cosmic design which extends across the endless reaches of time, revealing complex variations, innovations, and mysteries. We seldom question the attitudes, beliefs, and values which we absorb by cultural osmosis during our lifetimes. Change makes us uncomfortable. We are slow to challenge the opinions of our elders. When did that happen? Our instinctive reluctance to change customary living patterns may have developed in our evolutionary past as a survival mechanism. Toleration of established routines is neither good nor evil per se. Conformance with proven standards inherited from past generations has often sustained human societies through perils that otherwise might have proven fatal. Cultural inertias can be beneficial. 1,000 people welded together by common principles can be more effective in the world than 1,000 individuals going their separate ways. I wouldn't really want to be welded to anybody, but yet 1,000 individuals forced by tradition to follow the wrong path may be destroyed if they fail to heed warnings from nonconformists who perceive dangers unrecognized by the general mass of humanity. Changes in our collective behavior standards are sometimes necessary, although prudence requires that they be made with proper deliberation. At any moment in history, our cultural institutions display a wide variety, Each social group is unique. Different tribes and different nations have their own combinations of cultural features. Review of the worldwide store of knowledge and custom from one millennium to the next suggests what has been aptly termed cultural evolution, the progressive modification and adaptation of the flora and fauna of social elements similar in many ways to the ongoing modifications of genetics in living things. Human institutions and beliefs are selected for survival by overcoming challenges encountered in the changing circumstances of life as we move down the long river of time. Here we go with these mixed metaphors. I love them. In the struggle for survival among competing human groups, cultural traits inherited from ancient forebears will often determine which group or tribe or nation will survive and which will fall by the wayside. Biologically, the ancient Romans differed little from their contemporaries. They built and maintained an enduring empire because, on balance, their laws, patriotism, ideals, military organizations, and traditions made them stronger and more dynamic than their neighbors. They prevailed because of their cultural endowment. They extended their dominion over most of the civilized Western world. Some features of their society survive today in our laws and traditions, and their cultural heritage has endowed succeeding generations with a fitness for survival which persists unto this day. The social institutions, religious philosophies, and other agencies that now exist have proved their fitness simply by surviving. That fitness continues to be tested as the human carriers are confronted with endless new challenges. Unfit or outmoded cultural elements in early societies often have weakened or destroyed the very people who were their bearers. Rapidly changing times test the social adaptability of our cultural heritage. Excessive rigidity or unwise flexibility can have equally disastrous consequences. We must accept change, but do so thoughtfully with appropriate regard for the larger framework of life. We will be wise to maintain great respect for traditional values. Human nature has not changed in historical times. Traditional attitudes of society dealing with the family, sexual conduct, integrity in personal and business relationships, and with countless other ethical principles that have survived the test of time should not casually be discarded simply because technology has modified human living conditions in the modern world. Increasing knowledge has not changed our fundamental biological nature. In America today, we are witnessing a number of social changes that are causes for concern. The first has to do with widespread instability of the family unit. The second relates to an increasing dependency of many citizens upon government agencies for their financial support through a philosophy of entitlement fostered by elected officials, which assumes that Americans with financial problems are automatically endowed with the right to preempt from tax-paying fellow citizen funds to support them in idleness and comfort. The third cause for grave concern relates to the widely apparent dependence of many potential productive citizens upon drugs and alcohol as a means for narcotizing or avoiding the stresses of life's realities in our industrial society. A stable and secure family unit is a characteristic of the most enduring successful nations. In recognition of this fact, most societies have established strong legal and social sanctions to promote family stability, protecting the role of parents, and particularly that of the mother. In most cases, marriage has been a binding legal and social contract, supported and interwoven with laws relating to parental responsibility, children's rights, and the ownership and inheritance of property. In America, no other contracts are entered into with so much ceremony and public display as a modern wedding, complete with rented finery, impressive religious services, and large receptions. Guy must be Italian. Few other legal agreements take place before such assemblies of witnesses. No others involve such solemn public avowals of lifelong obligations to be terminated only by death. Yet despite the fanfare and promises, no other contractual arrangements are so flagrantly and quickly abandoned when one or both parties grow tired or disillusioned or merely bored with the obligations assumed under the marriage agreement. Today, nearly half of American marriages end in divorce, disrupting the lives of the partners and causing untold social and psychological consequences for the innocent children conceived in the emotional sunshine which has warmed the relationship in its early phases. Warning, more metaphors. Divorce shatters the home environment and disrupts the family relationship, a social arrangement that has proven most successful in nurturing children through their formative years, producing stable, well-adjusted adults. How much future damage will stem from society's tolerance of the present wholesale abandonment of marital and parental obligations by so many of our citizens? What will be the social and civic character of children whose fathers have abandoned their families, very often with inadequate financial support, nearly always depriving their children of the psychological reinforcement of a strong father figure of integrity? Marital stability is a legitimate concern of a society as a whole. Our national character and strength are threatened when we permit without effective protest today's widespread abandonment of marital obligations. We can deal with the problem by devising a formal code of social behavior and enforcing it with effective legal and economic supports. Children and adults must be made aware of the obligations as well as the benefits of citizenship. Irresponsible parenting must not be tolerated or encouraged. Mankind's need for moral guidance is now greater than ever before. The threat of nuclear war clearly calls for the application of ethical principles in international affairs. It is not too late. Let us hope that religious and philosophical leaders will soon join in guiding human behavior in a manner which will be acceptable to the people of all nations. American self-reliance is another virtue that needs renewal. Nearly half of our citizens receive government support. Distant officials take the earnings from some citizens and give them to others through a variety of entitlements and through direct and indirect subsidies. Such programs invariably stem from good intentions, but seldom are of lasting benefit, and too often have unexpected consequences in hampering productive efforts by the public at large. While collective action is no doubt required for special social problems, it is likely that greater overall advantage would accrue from tax incentive programs that stimulate private initiative in the generation of economic activities and in the creation of full employment for all citizens capable of productive labor. A properly tuned incentive economy will provide greater benefits for all and will bring the added advantage of maintaining our personal liberties. The present epidemic of drug and alcohol abuse raises many grave questions. We are confronted with a great array of social, economic, and military problems. Solving them will require the conscious efforts of us all, guided by our brightest and most innovative minds. When potential leaders become fogged with drugs, society loses the advantage of their initiative and abilities. We become deprived of our most powerful tools in the forging of future progress. More must be done to educate our people to the miserable effects of toxic substance abuse. We must reach young minds before they are lured into the fantasy world of chemical nirvana, from which many, once trapped, will never return. Let us provide better role models for impressionable young minds than we now permit in the form of entertainers and other influential public and private citizens who openly or covertly endorse the use of chemical escapes from unpleasant realities. Society today is undergoing great turmoil and change. Many traditional cultural agencies are being rigorously tested and challenged as they encounter modern needs. Conscious planning and intelligent control of the cultural evolution now in progress around us will hasten the establishment of an enduring age of reason. I didn't realize that we have, back in 1986, a cultural evolution now in progress. All right, so that was Chapter 4 of Common Sense Renewed. And now we got a short one here. Chapter 4, Guiding Human Reproduction. This ought to be a hoot. The most important function of every species is the procreation of its successors. This is especially true for humanity. We must perfect the ethical and legal constraints that regulate our conduct in this vital area so as to safeguard the long-range interests of society. Careless or purely self-centered actions by some must not be permitted to injure others. Industrialized nations are increasingly burdened by the social and monetary costs of raising children produced by irresponsible and inadequate parents. This is a grave injustice for those children and for those taxpayers who are burdened with the expense of providing them food, clothing, education, and housing. No society can remain strong and productive if it tolerates wholesale, irresponsible parenting. No longer is reproduction exclusively a personal matter between two individuals. More than any other human action, it affects all of society, now and in future ages. Society can provide practical incentives and disincentives to guide individuals in their childbearing so as to protect the legitimate long-term welfare of the larger social group. This must be done, even though at times the wishes of individuals must be made subordinate to the needs of the state. Reasonable compromises can achieve a balance between the individual's rights and those of other citizens. The plants and animals around us have survived because nature endowed their ancestral lines with superabundant powers of reproduction. For all but the few species we directly manage, this function is carried out reliably and automatically like the changing of the seasons. Vital sources cause living things to produce in excessive numbers, but competition for food and living space in hostile natural conditions weed out the weak and the defective, thus relieving excessive strains on the sustaining environment. Ultimately, there results for each species a dynamic balance with its surroundings and its competitors. The earthly role of humanity has undergone great changes in the past few thousand years. Our mental problems have transformed us from small, scattered tribal groups. Our mental powers, have transformed us from small, scattered tribal groups of primitive hunters into a global society of 5 billion. We have mechanized farming and industry. We harness vast amounts of energy to operate a global industrial agricultural complex which has changed the face of the earth. What, no military in there? We have revolutionized our way of life. We must now accommodate our reproductive behavior to our altered status. In our early history, we developed complicated social codes and economic arrangements which adapted our childbearing function to the needs of the society at the time. Large families meant that high death rates would not end the existence of tribal and national groups. Patterns suited to past circumstances still exist without proper modification or rational control. We are neglecting a major responsibility to improve our species by sensibly controlling and guiding our reproduction. Because we have controlled disease and many other life-threatening dangers, we need no longer depend upon high birth rates to assure the survival of our species. Excesses in childbearing often result in degradation and poverty. It will be extremely difficult, even in the short term, to provide 5 billion human beings with the material living standards typical of technically advanced societies today. A reduction in total numbers is essential to maximizing the potential of every human being. We cannot foretell the exact climax limit for human numbers, providing even 500 million people with current American living standards may exceed that limit on a perpetual timescale from both a resource and a pollution standpoint. Common sense would suggest that we make the reduction in a selective fashion. We are devoting more attention to the production of improved plants and animals than to the selective continuation of our own species. Worldwide human conception is still governed principally by biologic and social forces with little conscience guidance. We establish social environments in which many talented and productive individuals are constrained to limit their reproduction, while at the same time we provide subsidies that encourage childbearing by the indigent, the lazy, the irresponsible, and the inadequate. We fail to apply controls now available by which we could produce a succeeding generation of healthier and more productive human beings than those who live today. Our most valuable legacy would be a posterity that is the product of responsible parenting. Superior human intelligence, compassion, and drive are complex qualities. Although they are not inherited in a simple Mendelian fashion, they are to a large degree genetically determined, and they are reproducible, just as for the complex qualities we seek to enhance in the lesser life forms under our control and direction. Our own intricate natures are based in chemistry, and that chemistry can be shaped to a considerable degree by human intelligence. Desirable mental and physical qualities can be enhanced in future human populations by encouraging their reproduction and by discouraging the reproduction of their opposites. Talents which are considered to be marks of genius when they occur infrequently today can be made to occur more frequently in the world of tomorrow if we increase the contribution of gifted persons to the total gene pool through 10 or 20 generations. I'm assuming that this is what Galton and H.G. Wells, the latter more repugnantly and not happy with, the concept called selective breeding. Over 3,000 human disorders have now been identified as genetically determined. We can reduce their frequency in the human population of tomorrow if we discourage childbearing by known carriers. Responsible parenting will consider both genetic and environmental factors. We must seek to produce healthy children and then to mold their characters and develop their potentials as socially worthwhile adults who will in turn carry the process indefinitely into the future. Few human beings ever approach their maximum potentials in society. The cultivation of talent is a proper subject for study and conscious intervention. Some human beings are temperamentally unsuited for parenthood. They may have qualities which ought to be reproduced, yet they may have qualities that should be reproduced. Perhaps such individuals should transfer their natural children to the care of others capable of nurturing them into well-adjusted adulthood. We have a grave duty to use all available knowledge in perfecting the forces which guide our procreation. It is within our power to leave behind us a new generation of humanity slightly superior to our own in intellectual, social, and physical capabilities. In the remote future, no child should be born without this is important. In the remote future, no child should be born with congenital handicaps which could have been avoided by rational actions of his ancestors. Humanity has successfully applied practical genetic principles in developing domestic plants and animals. It is now within our power to begin the domestication of our own species in a parallel fashion. Our animal nature is only thinly disguised by a shell of civil behavior. Our tendencies to cruelty, selfishness, sloth, and lack of concern for others often overpower their opposite qualities. Yet each of us possess, at least in latent form, what Abraham Lincoln referred to as the better angels of our nature. We all share a degree of altruism, love, compassion, ambition, and a concern for our family, our nation, and our species. Docility, loyalty, and other desired qualities have been selectively augmented by human intervention and control over the breeding patterns of man's best friend, the dog. We could one day achieve comparable but much more important modifications in our own nature if we were to begin a conscious and sustained effort to direct our own genetics. Are we talking about training here? No baby should be born by accident. Every child must be wanted, needed, and loved. Every child should be nurtured in an environment favorable for developing latent talents and fulfillments. In future ages, the evolution of living things will be increasingly guided by human intelligence. It is essential that we improve our own nature concurrently so that we can better perform our shepherd's duty through our intervention love. Through our intervention love. What the heck is that? Love, compassion, and enlightened foresight can permeate the mechanistic world around us. Nations which fail to guide childbearing and child-rearing will not only suffer the effects of overpopulation, they will also be represented in the world of tomorrow by citizens of suboptimal qualities. The enhancement of intelligence and ability by guided reproduction is not a simple matter. The inheritable aspects of superior mental powers are not well understood. It is probable that they are conditioned and modified not only by genetic factors, but by nutritional and toxic influences which may be active from conception until death. They are also strongly affected by other environmental and cultural influences, especially in the first few years of life. Tom Paine observed over 200 years ago that, quote, wisdom is like a seedless plant. It may be reared when it appears, but it cannot be voluntarily produced. There is always a sufficiency somewhere in the general mass of society for all purposes, but with respect to the parts of society, it is continually changing its place. It rises in one today and another tomorrow, and has most probably visited in rotation every family of the earth and again withdrawn. End of quote. It does appear probable, however, that certain harmful abnormalities of a hereditary nature are directly controllable, and that behavioral patterns of an environmental nature tend to repeat themselves from one generation to another. Illiteracy and poverty are often examples of the latter. Workers and leaders of tomorrow are in their cribs today. It is prudent that we apply to their nurture the validated knowledge available to us. They're in their cribs. They're probably in, petri dishes somewhere. We are agents of the infinite, with a capital I. Nations which succeed in applying reason and compassion in the conception and rearing of their children will have guiding roles in the coming, here we go again, age of reason. All right, that ends it. For today, Part 2, Common Sense Renewed by Robert Christian, and this was passed along to me by Brian out of Washington State. And he has some comments about it that you'll hear in the garage sale. All right, thanks for being with us. Hope you'll stay with us as we go into this rationale, this justification about why we should gas ourselves. Well, at least some of us. See you later.